Today seems different.
This is the 3 a.m. podcast with Nick Rios, and tonight I'll be speaking with Nicholas Gomez, the author of Looming Tales and Bygone Times. All right, Nick, thanks for joining me, and welcome.
No, man. Thanks for having me.
I see 3 different names, kind of. Do you usually go by Nicholas, Nico, Nick?
Well, back home, people used to call me Nico. Right now, I go by Nick or Nicholas. No real reason behind that. Just a kind of preference, I guess. I just don't really like the way Nico rolls off the tongue when you're saying it in English. If you say it in Spanish, it's a lot more, I don't know, fluid or just. I guess I just got used to the sound of that.
Well, let's turn this back around. The reason we have you on here is to discuss Looming Tales and Bygone Times.
Yes.
Which is a ebook. What year did you publish it?
It was 2016, almost a year ago.
Okay. And you're 21 years old right now?
Correct.
Was this a project that you wrote in a short period of time? What was the time frame like putting together?
Well, it's interesting. I wrote the opening story, Littered Paradise, when I was in California, my first year of college. Wasn't that long ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. And I was taking a screenwriting class with one of the writers from Mulan. And it kind of changed my whole perspective on writing. I don't know. I was a writer since I was like 13 or 14, but most of that is in the junk folder now.
Sure.
And so that was the first story that I wrote for the book, and then I just continued to write, not really with the project in mind. And once I had 4 or 5 stories that I really liked, I just decided, hey, why not put this on Amazon so that I don't just have sitting documents, that aren't really being read by anyone. And once I had those 5 or 6 stories, I just started to build like, okay, there's kind of a theme going on with some of these. And then my focus for the next 4, I think there's 10 stories in there, I'm not sure, was just to kind of keep going with what I already had.
If you could summarize that theme, that common thread, how would you do so?
I think what best fits it is coming of age, but I would like to warn people with my writing that it's not exactly appropriate for all ages. I'm of the opinion that it kind of is, because it's stuff that's part of the real world, but for most people it's not exactly fitting, I guess.
Well, I think it was pretty PG-13 throughout, except for the first story, which is something I wanted to ask you about in particular, because I feel like it stood out. It was different, and it was a different universe, basically. And right away it had me wondering, okay, I know Mexico is tough, but how realistic is this, and how much is imagination, sort of an action movie, expressed through a street sort of perspective, or was gang life a part of your life growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing to consider about all of my stories is that even if it's fiction, a lot of it is taken from my experiences, either firsthand or secondhand, or stuff I've heard from friends of friends, or in the newspaper. And for that particular story, I've never been like directly involved with the cartel.
Okay.
But that was a little snippet that I overheard a couple of my friends talking about, that not just one time, but multiple times I would overhear like, oh, this girl from this other school, she got kidnapped for ransom, or one of my dad's best friends has a taco business and he just got what's the word? Like the cartel boys would go to his business. Yeah, shakedown. And then his dad's best friend would have to kind of move back home to Argentina or wherever he was from. So I guess what you could take as an experience of my own from that story is mainly just the knowledge of the town and of the people, and I guess primarily the stuff with the dad.
So you feel it was a reflection? Yeah, and I should have started this question by sort of clarifying that a lot of the book is, as you mentioned, coming of age, but in this first story, it sort of reads like, it actually reminded me a lot of this rap song by Immortal Technique, Dance with the Devil. And,
okay, I don't think I've heard it.
It's a dark song. It's a great rap song, though. Another common thread that I noticed, and I realized later that it's probably the cover of the book, is your father. And there's a line in it where it mentions he's a scuba diver, and we've got this diver on the front, so it leads me to believe that is your dad on the cover of the book.
That's actually, I don't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, that's actually me.
Okay.
Yeah, he is a scuba diver, and that picture was taken because of what he does. And
did you realize? I mean, is this at all surprising to hear me mention that it seems like your father was, because he kept coming up throughout the different stories?
I can't think of like the other stories he does come up in. I do remember there's one other story about the taxi driver, but
well, in a way, he was central to the first story because
with the first story, yeah.
And he's just sort of mentioned later in what I think was really, if there was a story in there that represents the book, it was your trip to Mexico.
Yes.
And he's discussed there briefly. That was also sort of my favorite part of the first story. Was the
part about the relationship with the dad.
Yeah, the guilt aspect and the concern about the father in a way.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because of just my relationship with my dad being not the most like emotionally connected.
Did you think that's because y'all didn't spend much time together, or was it something?
Well, I mean, if you really want to get deep into it, I think it's because of my dad's his own dad and his relationship with his dad, and whether it's just because of like the town that they were in or how my dad was raised, I think it was just really hard for him to be like an emotionally available. And so like I didn't have a bad childhood or anything, but I feel like I kind of maybe raised myself in some situations or in some aspects. And to tie it back to the book, that's what I've been writing most about, directly and indirectly, to kind of solve for myself. And so I think that's what I write what I know, and not because I think that's what you're supposed to do, but just because it's what's easiest for me. And because that way it feels a little more genuine. It feels a little more.
And it's something in your arsenal that you can start building with and learning some of the other mechanics of storytelling using this, readily available subject matter.
And one thing about that is that I always worry, like, because there's a lot of stuff in my stories that maybe you're reading a story about a kid that gets involved with the cartel and his dad is working in this place, and I wrote that because my dad worked in the farming industry or whatever. I do worry that like people are gonna take a lot more as truth than it really is.
Hmm.
But that's one of the struggles I've had is like, oh, if I read a story about a kid who's prostituting himself, are my parents going to read it and think that I'm prostituting myself?
Uh, I would guess not. I would think you're. I mean, I'm just going on a limb. We don't really know each other, and you were just saying that you're sort of estranged from them. But I was reflecting on myself. If I wrote a story like that, I think they might ask,
Right.
but
Or
yeah,
friends or anything like that. Because
sure.
I do write stories that are 100% true, and there's even one or two, or maybe even three in that book that are like 100% true.
Well, go for it. You know,
Yeah,
it's the process.
yeah,
Makes it worth it. The relationship when you're speaking to women, particularly later in the book, it's it feels like I can almost feel the nerves through it, like with a thin veil of confidence and kind of the intellectualism, but it kind of created for me this emotion of pins and needles for the, for the main character.
in what sense?
Almost this surprise that the women were talking to them and sort of this cherishment of every moment in a sense, going back and forth between being surprised versus not being surprised by a positive reaction. So,
Okay.
this book, you read it honestly, and I see what you're saying before about putting your soul out there because it gives the reader or an introspection into, I think, the author. At least that's what you end up assuming, after you read it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's um, what people are drawn to, especially with fiction or even nonfiction, if it's the traditional storytelling and not like a business book. Um, people want to read something where they're not just transported into a world that's true or not true, but where they can see parts of their own lives in the story that they're reading. And if you manage to do that while still maintaining like a veil of believability and not like if you're in outer space, then there's only so much you can really relate to. But I mean, that's a compliment, man. That's a compliment to me. I really appreciate that. That's what I was really trying to do. Um, I don't think consciously, but yeah,
You can you can hear that because there's certain contradictions, I guess. For example, in the Mexico story, he's having this conversation with his friends in which he sort of feels like he's the enlightened one in that conversation, and he's gauging his friends' reactions and saying, "Okay, I'm just going to allow this to kind of let him think that because he's not going to look at it this other way." But just earlier in that week, it was kind of there was the part where he's sort of the character is afraid to leave the room because they don't want to really be uncomfortable interacting with the grandmother. So they ends up staying in there,
yeah,
and I don't know. So that's sort of back and forth. It sounds like it's part of your voice. That's all I'm saying.
right, yeah, and like I guess with that particular story and a lot of the stories that aren't in that book, sometimes I don't really, and I think this is a lot of books or stories in general. There's no real plot. There's no real. Um, there might be some character development, but that's not the focus of the story. If you read any of Charles Bukowski's early
Hmm.
books, like
I mean, I've read at least
there's,
5 or 6 Bukowski novels. I think
yeah, I mean,
I
think
think
about
Women
Bukowski.
was the first one I read, and Run with the Hunted is the one that I've read the most recently because just have it on my bookshelf and it's still been
Yeah,
years. But
I've only read the Chinaski kind of anthology.
hmm
Um, but if you think of those books, there's really not much of a plot. There's somebody living their life, and
well, uh, Yeah, I see what you mean, but those are that's maybe one out of five where you get these kind of situational descriptions, and he just kind of gets into detail about Tammy or his girlfriend. I forget her name now, the redhead.
Hmm.
Coming over high on poppers and just like eating turkey or something, and then leaving. But that's intermixed with that are these compact little body blows, whether it be poems or observations. That and
Well, yeah, but that's not necessarily a plot. There's not necessarily a story going on. There's a story if you read all five of them
mhm,
of this person's transformation and what you learn about. Okay, he grew up this way. This is why he behaves this way.
yeah, learns about his father a little bit, and there's sort of a throughout the books an underlining storyline, the making of his movie,
Yeah, exactly. There's
which
an overarching like plot, if you
which
could
kind
call
of and it connects in a back channel, I guess, through those you know autobiographical parts of his books
it. Yeah,
and his
yeah.
his relationship with women in general, but a couple in particular. He would be an interesting guy to hang out with. I love the random college students just wanted to come over and drink with him.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't see him as a role model because I read him when I was pretty like younger than I am now, maybe 14.
What's your relationship to booze like?
Uh, I kind of have this everything with me is a contradiction, man. Uh, I grew up in Cancun, and if you know one thing about Cancun, it's probably that it's a party zone and tourist attraction. And living there, I mean, it's different, but that's still very much the feeling that you get on a daily basis. And alcohol, like I got drunk when I was 13 for the first time. I blacked out,
Hmm.
and so I don't know, man. I don't really like what alcohol the environments that you find yourself when you're drinking alcohol.
Hmm.
I mean, of course, I like the way it makes me feel when I drink it before I get hungover, but I think it's an escape like any other drug, and I use it not like I don't abuse it, but I use it to get out of my head, and I think the more that I use it, the less I'm actually gonna get out of my head in the long run because it's such a momentary feeling. But so yeah, I mean, I if I could, I would never drink again and just find a way to be myself 24 hours a day. But there's lots of situations where I find myself,
Hmm.
like the characters in my book, just either on pins and needles myself and like, oh, what do I say to this strange person that's talking to me that I find attractive? And if I drink, then I don't have that narrative going on in my head. Which
At least for that golden 30 minutes or however long it
ex-
might be.
exactly, and that's why I think, I mean, this is not a enlightening point of view, but that's why most people drink, and that's why I say like the environments that you find people drinking in aren't that
Well,
um,
that's true. I mean,
enjoyable.
there's also something to be said for just tearing yourself up, in which, and I think that's what an addiction is. You just have something that you know you shouldn't necessarily be doing, but you just decide I'm going to go through it instead of the other way, and let's just see how deep this thing goes.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've ever been a huge, or I know I haven't ever been a huge alcoholic. And now, I'm in my late 30s, so I'm pretty docile. But I remember a period of time, a good 10-year stretch, where it was about getting intoxicated somehow every day.
Right. Well, I mean, you did order a what was it? 12.5% beer. First time I met you.
That's true. Well, it was the only dark beer they had on tap, so it was pretty good, nice and sweet.
Yeah. No, but yeah, man. I mean,
All right, I see what you're
like
saying.
if I think about it,
Yeah,
But
I hate the hangover as well. It's just not worth it. Of any drug, pretty much.
yeah, well, not as much. It's not as much about the physicality of what it does to me. It's just there's no connection when everyone's on alcohol. Um,
Hmm.
there's no deep connection going on, and I think that's just something I've always kind of. I'm that type of person.
So for you, it feels fake when people are kind of
It's
being ridiculous.
well, yeah, and
Maybe
I would
that's the
even
product of being the sober one watching drunk people.
yeah. There's that. There's
And that's
definitely that.
because that's totally annoying. I mean, I hate that.
But
Especially,
I would also give credit to the fact that knowing how it feels when you're drunk and how like sure I want to be this way, but this isn't really how I am, at least not yet. And so it is fake if you look at it closely enough, because no, not the people that are drinking to behave a certain way, which is a way that they don't behave yet. And so I guess it's kind of a critical part of me to look at people that way who are drinking, but it's also the contradiction, you know? I mean, I do it too. We all do it.
hmm no, it's a nice little, and you don't have to get. I don't think I've honestly, just on booze alone, or on anything. I do not think I've ever blacked out and had a situation that people have described where they don't remember what happened in a given time. I mean, I've projectile vomited. I've gone through terrible embarrassment and self humiliation, but I remember it. I remembered it the next day. Type
Yeah.
thing.
I guess you're just one of the unlucky ones.
And how long you been in Texas?
It'll be 2 years in August.
I was curious. How'd you hear about Austin? From down there.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to listen to movie reviews on YouTube from a podcast. It was called Spill.com,
Hmm.
and they actually came from public access here in Austin, just on the regular TV. And then they built their Spill.com website, and I used to listen to their movie reviews. Then they had their own site. Then they had their own podcast, and they talk a lot about not just the movie reviews and the media and all that, but what their lives are like here, what they do, what there is to do. So that was one source. That's how I heard about Austin originally.
Hmm.
And then the reason I moved here was because of another podcast, completely different to that one, but also based in Austin, that's called The Mating Grounds.
Wow. Great. I never heard of it either of those, but then again, I don't listen to many podcasts. Yet.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yet.
Probably ever.
Yeah. But so that podcast is a lot more about how to create a healthy lifestyle for yourself. And they have this series that's called Helping Joe, where they go like 40 episodes deep and help this guy basically rebuild his life. And they do that in Austin. And so I was kind of in the same situation as the Joe guy that they're helping. And I said, well, if I'm planning on moving somewhere, and I know that these guys who are professionals and experts in this field are doing that in Austin, why not do it there?
Sure. I mean, I think almost for a lot of different creative endeavors, Austin is going to be in your top 10 cities in the whole United States.
Yeah, I would even say top five.
For sure. I think you can make that argument. Depending on, I don't know what we're talking about specifically and who you are, I guess, but
Well, sure, if you wanna go work in crops, Austin's not the worst place, but
we're not the
it's
biggest dollar city yet,
yeah,
which is
true,
not a bad thing. I mean, this was
true.
a small, considered a medium-sized town 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's why it's I don't know, I think it's a lot of people complain about, people moving here from LA or all different parts of the world, but I don't see growth as a bad thing.
I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of positive things we get in this town because of its a little fame, and because of all the people
Yeah,
that come in for the different festivals
yeah,
that we wouldn't get otherwise, that we like. So
yeah.
traffic's a
And
little
I
rough.
actually just to tie that back, I see Cancun as kind of the opposite, um,
Hmm.
because you don't get the you do get a lot of people from all over the world, but they're not there for the same reasons that people come to Austin to visit. They're just there because it's like going to Vegas. It's you go there because nobody will be there, and you can just go on a
Well,
random spree of debauchery.
come on now. It's everybody's it's kind of like if you go up to the mountains and you go skiing. You just sort of get into the mindset.
You'd be surprised. I mean, and this isn't some like exact figures, but are maybe out of 10 of the people that I talk to that go to Cancun or tourists that I encountered there, 9 out of 10 people don't leave their resort unless it's to go somewhere else indoors, like a nightclub or a show. And so that's why I compare it to Vegas, is because in Vegas there's really not much you can see or do in terms
Uh-huh.
of besides what Vegas offers. And
I got you. Yeah, that's a fair point.
yeah,
And you hear about that. I mean, that the resorts are just sucking up all the resources basically in the area.
yeah, a lot of the natural, like, whether it's, I forget the name for this in English, but in Spanish it's called the manglar.
Hmm.
And there's a lot, not just hotels or resorts, but apartment buildings that they have to tear those down, destroy them, and just build on top of. And what those do is kind of protect because it is it's right on the peninsula, Cancun. The manglar protects from storms and waves and all that. So if a hurricane comes or whatever it may be, there's not as much damage done. And so that's mainly been like the discussion right now over there. It's just the protection of those. But I mean, that's going to happen.
Yeah, I've visited the border towns on a few occasions and gone up the Baja coast a little bit, but I've never really. These were just like short trips, multi-day trips. I would love to
Yeah.
explore Mexico and maybe go stay in Monterrey for like 3 months.
I would actually recommend, if you're going to Mexico for the first time and you want to dive as deep as you can into it, I would say Mexico City is the place,
Yeah,
especially if you're by yourself.
that would be great. I know
Yeah.
it'd be terrible, but it would also be mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be terrible, but it'll be
It
a
all
good
depends
kind
on
of.
how much money you go in there with, too. How terrible it could be. I'm sure. It could be
Yeah, I
pretty
mean,
comfortable.
how much money you get robbed from or robbed of. I had a friend in high school. His dad was in um, timeshare, and I went over to his house one day, and my friend had talked a lot about, like, yeah, my dad, he's got all this power and yeah, yada yada yada. So I go over to his house for lunch, and we're all eating at the table with his parents, and my friend tells his dad, "So what are you gonna do to the pool boy after he messed up the lights?" And his dad his dad looks over at him, like, not a single sign of like humor in his face or any smile, anything like that, and he says, if he fucks that up again, I'm gonna have to kill him. But I don't want you to talk about that in front of your guests ever again. And I really don't know to this day how much of that was a joke or just.
Well,
But
let's definitely hope it was a joke, and that there's not, even if there are gangsters that are chopping off heads, that they wouldn't kill the pool boy just for screwing up the lights. I mean, that's a little ridiculous.
it is. I mean,
uh, I was just gonna say that, and it's when you mentioned how this friend of yours was bragging about his father's power, it reminded me of that son of the villain in Kick-Ass.
oh yeah, yeah. That's exactly what he's like.
The motherfucker, I
The
believe.
McLovin dude, or is that the second one?
I think it's the same guy, probably.
Same guy. Yeah.
Pretty
No, yeah,
much,
that's
right?
pretty accurate.
I'm looking at a picture of Nicholas Gomez right now, as a matter of fact, standing in front of some mountains in the About the Author page.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to, I don't know where you're putting this out, but if anyone wants to get the book, it's on Amazon. You can get it for free if you got the Kindle Whisper, whatever bullshit is called.
Probably Amazon Prime.
Yeah. But yeah, man.
Or throw in $4. I mean, help a brother out. It's going to be one beer for him that he probably won't drink.
One beer. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, hey, it was good talking to you, and thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, man.
This has been Nick Rios with the 3 a.m. podcast. Thanks for listening, and have a great morning.